Jane, chapter 24, page 212. Jane lay in bed long after Bella and Yetta left for work. She could hear echoes of what Miss Milhouse had told her back in the fall when she wouldn't get up in the morning. Really, Miss Wellington, you must expunge yourself of this torpor. But that bed had crisp white sheets and an elegant coverlet. This bed had a rusted frame, a single worn grayish sheet, and a stained, tattered quilt that Yetta's grandmother had made back in Russia. Jane could hear what Miss Milhouse would say if she could see Jane now. Really, Miss Wellington, such squalor, such degradation, such foolishness. You'll be ruined in society if anyone finds out where you are. She could hear her father's words echoing in her mind. Would you have us all living in hovels, wearing sackcloth and ashes, eating gruel? She knew exactly how her father and Miss Milhouse would view the tenement, with its cracked walls, its chipped sink, its hovering stench of rotted food and unwashed bodies. It had taken a great effort for Jane herself not to wrinkle her nose in disgust the first time she stepped in here. But then Bella had said, "See our vase of flowers," pointing to a cheap glass on the table with two crumpled roses sticking up. "That's all that's left from Rahel's beautiful hat after the strike," Yetta muttered. The flowers were fake, of course, but somehow they transformed the entire tenement for Jane. Suddenly she saw past the cracks and the chips and the cheapness. She saw the beauty of two battered cloth roses, the ingenuity of beds rigged from chairs, the cleverness and courage and triumph of two girls living on their own. And now, even hearing the echoes of Miss Milhouse's criticisms, her father's taunts, she could see the triumph and courage and nobility of Jane Wellington, lying on a rusty, tattered bed in a tenement instead of amid perfect, fluffy pillows in a mansion. But what was she supposed to do next? Just to prove that she could get out of bed, Jane sat up and eased away from the tattered quilt. She slid her feet onto her boots right away, because the floor was bare wood and full of splinters, as well as icy cold. She did not have to bother about changing clothes because she'd been sleeping in her dress. It was all she had. "Could I possibly borrow a nightgown from one of you?" she'd asked the first night, and both Yetta and Bella had looked at her blankly. It appeared that neither of them had an extra. One night shirt, one night dress, one shirt waist, one skirt. Jane had had a hard time understanding such limitations. But now she had just one dress herself. She made a feeble attempt to comb and pin up her hair, but she had no skill at that. Without maids, she was as helpless as a 5-year-old. She dealt with that problem by turning away from the small sliver of broken mirror that hung on the wall. She slipped out the door and out to the street. Some fresh air would do her good. But the air in the street was bitterly cold and hardly fresh. There was a rancid smell of some foreign food cooking. An organ grinder's monkey bent down and defecated on the street. Strangers' bodies pressed against hers disgracefully. The crowd parted, and Jane found herself on the curb. Someone pushed at her, and she lost her balance, falling forward onto horsehide. Oh, a horse was lying in the street, ready to break her fall. How fortunate. The horsehair was soft, and Jane stroked it in relief. Then she realized that the hair was strangely cold, and still to be attached to a living horse. The ribs below the horsehair moved neither up nor down. The horse was dead, its rump half rotted. Shrieking, Jane scrambled up. A gang of filthy-faced, snotty-nosed ragamuffins laughed uproariously to see her screaming. One laughed so hard that he rolled into the street right on top of the monkey's droppings. A little girl with the tangled curls stared stupidly at Jane, her eyes seeping with some kind of infection. "Does no one have money to take away the dead horse from the street?" Jane wondered. "To put those ragamuffins in school? To fix that girl's eyes?" When Jane was little, she'd been fascinated with the stereoscope that her mother kept in the parlor. You looked through the two eye holes at separate pictures, and somehow the pictures merged into one that was three-dimensional and looked so real you felt you could reach out and touch it. With the stereoscope, the two pictures separately always looked somewhat alike. Two views of Half Dome in Yosemite Park, say, or two views of the Grand Canyon. But Jane's mind was working now like a different kind of stereoscope. In her mind, she held the view of the dead horse, the ragamuffins, the seepy-eyed girl alongside her memories of seeing the shirtwaist strikers calling fervently for justice, seeing her dozens of dresses strewn across the floor the day she offered one to Bella, and seeing an image of herself lying in bed with the stereoscope back home. Jane had always had trouble focusing, bringing the pictures together exactly. She was having the same trouble now. One of the ragamuffins stopped laughing and appeared to be patting her head comfortingly. No, he was trying to worm the ring from her finger. "Oh, no, you don't," Jane roared. "My mother gave me that ring." The ragamuffin had had the ring off her finger and was about to slip it into his own pocket. Jane grabbed for it desperately and succeeded only in swatting it away. It flew through the air, sparkling, and landed in the smashed monkey dung. Jane did not hesitate. She snatched up the ring and raced away through the crowd, shoving, elbowing, kicking with all her might, until she was back in the tenement. She slammed the door as hard as she could. When Yetta and Bella came home, Jane was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the vase of artificial flowers and turning her ring over and over in her hands. She scrubbed the ring in soapy water, scrubbed it, rinsed it, and scrubbed it and rinsed it again and again and again. But still she stopped to examine it every few minutes to make sure there was no filth caught in the engraved J on the ring's surface. As soon as Yetta and Bella opened the door, Jane said, "I need money of my own." Both the other girls stopped in surprise, and then Bella rushed over to hug Jane, while Yetta quietly closed the door. "See, she understands," Bella said, flashing a glance at Yetta. "It's not that we mind sharing," Yetta said apologetically. "It's just that the rent works out to $2 a week, and we still owe the landlord extra from when we were on strike. And potatoes are 5 cents a pound, and with the three of us, it'd be 9 cents a week for milk, and Yetta and me, we're only making $6 a week each," Bella said, "if we're lucky and the bosses pay it at all." Jane had been thinking, "There are such small amounts of money. What are you talking about?" Until Bella chimed in with the salaries, which were small too. "I'm a burden," she realized. "Oh," she laughed uncomfortably. "I didn't. You should have told me. But it's not that. It's not just that. I mean, it takes money for everything, and I didn't know that. It's not just for buying your way into society or for winning a proper husband. That dead horse in the girl's eyes and the ragamuffins. If I had money, my own money, I could have helped them. Even the boy who tried to steal my ring. Maybe he was starving. Maybe that was why he had no morals. Maybe no one ever taught him that stealing was wrong." Jane saw that Yetta and Bella had no idea what she was talking about. They looked totally confused. "I just want to do something, like you did with the strike." "And not that worked out so great," Yetta muttered. Jane clutched at her head, knocking out her hairpins and destroying the last vestige of her attempt at a hairstyle. "I'm so confused," she moaned. "Maybe I'm just trying to justify going back to my father, if he'll even let me come back. Maybe I don't want you to say, it's all right to go home. It is all right to go home," Bella said. "I miss my family too. If I can go back to them." "But I don't miss my father," Jane said. "I miss his money. It's not the same. His money is evil. But I miss my flowers, my flowered wallpaper, and my clean glass windows, and the orange juice from Florida, and you probably think I'm a horrible person. Maybe I don't really want to help the boy who tried to steal my ring. Maybe I don't even care. Maybe it's all about me. I want to go to college, and I want to take a grand tour of Europe, and I want to have real roses on my table." Yetta leaned in close. "So earn the money yourself," she said fiercely. "Earn your own money and save it, and then use it however you want." Jane blinked back tears. "I'm not like you," she said. "I'm not brave and courageous and strong. I couldn't sit there all day at the sewing machine. I don't even know how to sew." She remembered what Eleanor had said with the scorned voice when she hissed, "What's my choice? Working in some factory as a shirtwaist girl? No, thank you." Jane didn't want Yetta and Bella to think that she was similarly scornful. "Don't you see?" she wailed. "I'm useless. I was raised to be totally dependent on others." She shoved a tangled strand of hair out of her eyes. "I can't even do my own hair. Just a few nights away from home, and I stink, and I'm filthy, and my hair's a wreck, and I don't understand how you do it. Staying so clean and tidy and cheerful, living in these circumstances." She waved her hand wildly, the gesture taking in every chip and crack in the room, every belch of smoke from the stovepipe that layered filth and ash on every surface, every ice crystal creeping up the insides of the windows. "We're not saints," Bella said at the same time that Yetta muttered, "I'm not cheerful." The two girls exchanged glances, and then Bella ventured, "Yetta, heard of a job you could do? Not sewing, something that uses what you know, how you were raised." Yetta sat down at the table. "The Blancs need a governess for their daughters," she said. "Someone who can teach them to get along in society." Jane gaped at her. "Oh, my heavens! You want me to be Miss Millhouse?" It was funny, actually, in a cruel way. Having escaped her jailer, Jane was now expected to become a jailer. "You want me to teach other girls to pull their corset strings so tight they can't breathe," Jane said. "To speak only when spoken to lower their eyes and simper and say, 'Oh, you beast,' when boys flirt, whether they like it or not. To always let men think that they are smarter and stronger and better." "Maybe you could be a subversive governess," Yetta suggested. "Pretend that you're telling them all those things, but secretly tell them the truth. Unions are good. Women should vote. Girls are as smart as boys. Maybe you could even inspire Mr. Blanc for us. Let us know what he's planning for Triangle." This appealed to Jane. The thought of being a servant was horrifying, but espionage was glamorous. She remembered hearing the rumors about one of the other girls at her finishing school, that the girl's grandmother had been a spy during the Civil War. The notion seemed too incredible to be believed, but Jane had not been able to stop herself from staring when the old woman came to an end-of-term singing concert. Jane was disappointed in the woman's steel gray hair, her wrinkles, and her prim black dress with the cameo pins around her neck. She looked entirely ordinary, but maybe that was the secret of being a good spy. "Begging your pardon," Bella said, pulling up her own table at the chair, "I think what's wrong with Miss Millhouse is that she doesn't love you." I'm sorry. I'm sorry if that's hurtful, but listen to me. I have brothers and a sister who had runny noses all the time, and they were rough and tumble. They were rough and tumble and never left me alone for a minute, and I loved them. I loved them with a love that was so deep and so true that I crossed the ocean. I came to America trying to save their lives. And then I lived with the Lucianos, and their children had runny noses, and they were dirty, and the baby cried all the time. And I hated them because they weren't Giovanni or Ricardo and Dominique and Julia. I don't think I would have crossed the street to save any of their lives. So, not even Rocco's? Yetta asked. That came later, Bella said with stiff dignity. Later, I liked Serafina too. And I'm sorry that baby died, but when I hated them at first, that wasn't good. And if I had been what's that called? Their governess, I would have been very mean to them. So, spying or no, whatever you tell them, what you should decide on is whether or not you think these are children that you can care about, because children should have people who love them. This was the most Jane had ever heard Bella say in her littling accent that made even English words sound foreign. But Jane understood what she meant. She twisted the ring on her finger, traced the clean swoop of the engraved J with her thumbnail. "My mother loved me," she said. "My father? I don't know. It never really seemed like it." That was hard to admit, that her own father might not love her. "Even if he was a horrible, evil, strike-breaking man," she went on, "and Miss Millhouse, you're right, she never loved me." Jane thought how easy that had made it for her to run away. Other girls had living, loving mothers who tell them tighten their corsets and to marry the wealthiest man who made an offer, or the man with the most impressive European title. And of course they listened because their mothers loved them, and they loved their mothers. Maybe love could be a trap too. Jane felt dazed and no less confused, but she nodded solemnly at Bella and Yetta. "Thank you for your advice," she said. "I will remember it. I don't know if anyone will hire me as a governess, but I will try. I will try." Yetta and Bella worked hard getting Jane ready to meet the Blancs. They decided she should wear the serge dress she'd given Bella back in December. "You mean you can let the seams out again?" Jane marveled. "Just like that? You didn't cut the dress down to fit?" Cut in haste, repent at leisure, Yetta said, waving scissors at her reprovingly. Oh, is that a proverb in Russia too? Jane asked. No, I learned it in my English class, Yetta said. But I don't really understand it. Isn't leisure good? Isn't that something you want, like time to have fun? Why would you repent while you were having fun? Leisure can also be just time to stop and think, Jane said. What the proverb means is that if you do something in a hurry without thinking about it, then when you stop and think, you'll regret it. Like running away from home? Jane wondered. She pushed that thought aside because Bella and Yetta were so merry, fitting the dress back together, trying out new styles for Jane's hair, showing her how to polish her boots until they gleamed. What will we do about a hat? Bella moaned. Jane thought of the rows and rows of hats sitting on the shelves back at her own house. Hats with feathers, hats with flowers, even one with a little stuffed duck tucked along the brim. Bella seemed to be thinking along the same lines. If you just remembered to wear one when you came here, she scolded. You always had such beautiful hats when you came to the picket line, Yetta said dreamily. But they're tainted, remember, Jane said, bought with my father's evil money. So was your dress, and your boots, and that blanket, and you brought those. I do like the warm blanket, Bella said. I'm glad you brought it. She was the one who'd been sleeping with it at night, because she was the one who had slept in the bed improvised from chairs. Worst bed, best blanket. It seemed only fair. Wish she'd brought a blanket for me too, Yetta joked. And maybe one of those soft pillows, Bella said. And I've always wanted to try orange juice. I wouldn't have complained if you brought some of that, Yetta added. I had some at Jane's house, Bella bragged. Isn't that what you gave me in the mornings, in those sausages? I wouldn't have minded if you brought us some of the sausages. They were teasing her, and that was all right. She hadn't known. They craved luxuries too. They were poor girls, but they were still girls. They wanted frilly dresses and ruffly skirts and glorious hats that Jane had always taken for granted. Since I'm taking this serge dress back from you, Bella, you should have my day gown, Jane said, holding out the stained lace dress she'd been wearing for days. I think it will come clean. Oh, I've got the shirt, waist, and skirt that Rocco gave me for Christmas, Bella said, reaching out and touching the lace edging on one sleeve. Where would I ever wear a dress like that? We should hang it on the wall to show people that we've got more clothes than we need. Tears glistened in her eyes. I never thought back in Kalia that I'd ever have so much in America. It was strange. What was poverty to Jane was untold riches to Bella. I know, said Yetta, bolting upright. She rushed out the door and came back a few minutes later, holding a hat out in front of her, like someone proudly displaying a trophy. Sadie across the hall said you can borrow it, just for tomorrow, Yetta said. Prettiest hat in the building, don't you think? Try it on. The Miss Millhouse voice had seemed to have taken up residence in Jane's head and hissed, absolutely not. It's undoubtedly crawling with vermin. A hat borrowed from a strange girl in a tenement. And anyhow, see how the velvet's worn thin around the crown and the fake chrysanthemums don't begin to cover it? Chrysanthemums, and you know that chrysanthemums are dreadfully out of style this season. But another voice in Jane's head, the one that was getting stronger, said that it was incredibly kind of Sadie across the hall to loan her best hat to a stranger. Jane reached forward, took the hat, and placed it on her head. Perfect, Yetta said. Lovely, Bella agreed. So Jane was in borrowed and re-sewn finery when she stood on the front step of the Blanc home. It's much smaller than my house, she told herself, to make herself feel better about the borrowed hat and the made-over dress, except was her house, the Wellington mansion, or the tenement she shared with Bella and Yetta. A butler opened the door. He looked appropriately scornful, as if he knew about the tenement. He knew about the chrysanthemums were out of the style on the hats. Yes, he said. I understand that Mrs. Blanc is looking for a governess, Jane said. Servant's entrance at the back, the butler said, beginning to shut the door. Jane stuck her foot in the door. I want Mr. Blanc to understand that I know how young ladies should behave, she said, that I can show them how to act, and which door to use. The butler looked chagrined to let her in. Don't tell Mr. Blanc I don't know how to proper butlering. I don't know proper butlering, he said in such a greenhorn He said, I'm such a greenhorn. I keep thinking they're going to fire me. At least you have the accent right. I don't have an accent, Jane said. Exactly, the butler said. You sound like a proper American. Jane decided it wasn't worth protesting, that she was a proper American. The butler led her to a gaudy, overstuffed parlor and went to alert Mrs. Blanc. Jane wondered if the servants at her own house had kept secrets from her and her father. Of course they did. She thought about remembering how Mr. Corrigan had kept the secret about taking Jane to the strike rally. But this made her see things differently. Once again, maybe being a servant wouldn't be so bad. She'd have allies. A short, heavy-set woman in an overlay frilled gown appeared in the doorway of the parlor. Jane remembered to rise respectfully. Mrs. Blanc, she said. Je m'appelle Mademoiselle Michaud. I am Mademoiselle Michaud. She and Yetta and Bella had agreed that she shouldn't use her own name. Using French and then translating seemed deliciously pretentious. How nice to meet you, Mrs. Blanc said, looking sufficiently impressed. Please sit down. Her words were so heavily accented in a way that seemed oddly familiar. Where else have I heard? Oh, Yetta. Everyone in our tenement building except Bella and me. Mrs. Blanc must be from Russia. At least now Jane knew better than to ask her to say something in Russian. Mrs. Blanc was twisting her hands in her lap. I want the best for my daughter, she said. Of course you do, Jane said, and she was surprised that her voice came out sounding so warm and supportive. She couldn't help liking someone who had her daughter's best interests at heart. My husband and I, Mrs. Blanc seemed to be deciding how much she could say. She leaned forward as if preparing to confide news of a delicate nature. We were not born to money. Most of our lives have been struggle, struggle, struggle. Jane longed to ask questions. Were you starving back in Russia like Bella in Italy? Did you live in fear of being killed because you were Jewish like Rahel and Yetta? Were you a shirtwaist girl when you first came to America? Did you work in a sweatshop? Did you live in a tenement? It seemed suddenly as though that could all be true. Jane looked around the crowded parlor with its stuffed birds under the glass and carved Egyptian statues and clashing striped and flowered wallpaper. Miss Milhouse would have sniffed. A bit overdone, wouldn't you say? Ostentation by the nouveau rich is never appealing. But it seemed only sad to Jane that Mrs. Blanc was trying so hard. My husband is a business genius, Mrs. Blanc said. Now we're able to provide better lives for our children. We want their lives to be easy, full of wealth and accomplishment. This was Jane's cue to say, I can speak 4 languages. I can play the piano. I know which fork to use during each course of a formal dinner. I could be very useful to you. But she remembered Bella's advice. What you should decide on is whether or not you think these are children you can care about. I should meet your daughters now, Jane said. Now? Jane nodded. Mrs. Blanc looked a bit uncertain, but she hollered, Brodsky, tell Millicent and Harriet to come down here. If Jane got this job, she would teach Mrs. Blanc that a bell was much more appropriate way to summon a servant than yelling. Maybe it was too late for Mrs. Blanc, but Jane could teach the girls, at least, that the Victorian era of a parlor design was long past, that stripes and flowers didn't go together on wallpaper, that this was a family longing for her knowledge. They wanted what she'd had taken for granted and had run away from. The girls appeared at the entryway to the parlor. Millicent, the older one, was about 11 or 12, a shy-looking girl with a giant ribbon in her hair. Harriet, the younger one, was 4 or 5, and she had a look of mischief about her. Stand up straight now, girls, Mrs. Blanc said. They seemed to be trying, but Harriet kept wiggling sideways to scratch fervently at a place on her arm along the seam of her sleeve. Lace sleeves, Jane thought. Itchiest clothing on the entire planet, especially where the seam meets. Unexpectedly, Jane remembered something about herself at 4 or 5, the time she'd hidden under her father's desk during the birthday party. Like Harriet, she'd had lacy sleeves on her dress then, and the reason she thought the desk would be a great hiding place because no one would tell her to stop scratching if she hid there. Say hello to Mademoiselle Michaud, girls, Mrs. Blanc instructed. If you are polite enough and keep your hands down, Harriet, she might become your next governess. Mrs. Blanc turned back to Jane expectantly, her eyes begging, Please don't find fault with my daughters. Jane saw that she had the advantage here. Mrs. Blanc was impressed with, even cowed, by Jane's unaccented English and her upper-class bearing and her lack of bragging or babbling. Mrs. Blanc admired everything that Jane's father's money had bought. There would be an interview, and Jane would have to lie a little about how a girl like herself had reached such reduced circumstances that she was applying to be a governess for immigrants' daughters. Jane would only have to simply to imply some unfortunate tragedy too delicate a matter to divulge. And really, was that such a lie? Jane would have no problems convincing Mrs. Blanc to offer her this job. The question was, did Jane want it? Jane thought about all the reasons on the other side. The degradation of being a servant versus the value of earning her own money. The chance to be a subversive influence versus the possibility of turning into Miss Millhouse. The opportunity to spy and help Yetta and Bella's union versus the dangers of working for an evil man. But it really came down to watching Harriet scratch her arm. These girls are a lot like me, Jane thought, like I was. Someday they would be grown up and learn where their money had come from. They'd learn that their father had hired prostitutes and policemen to beat up innocent girls, his own employees. If Jane ever figured out how to deal with the revelations about her own father, maybe she could help Millicent and Harriet. There's more to life than ease and wealth and accomplishment, she could tell them. Surely she could figure it all out in time to teach it to Millicent and Harriet. The end.